So there I was, sitting in the most advanced educational facility in the known galaxy, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. The Galactic Academy for Diplomatic Excellence. Yeah, that's a real mouthful, isn't it? They couldn't just call it space school like normal people. But then again, nothing about this place was normal. My name's Jake Morrison, and I'm what you might call an anomaly around here. First human to ever apply to the academy, let alone get accepted. The admissions committee probably thought it was some kind of cosmic joke when my application came through. A species that hadn't even figured out faster than light travel until the Centaurians took pity on us, applying to become a galactic peacekeeper. Hilarious, right? The classroom looked like something out of a fever dream designed by someone who'd never seen furniture before. Floating chairs that adjusted to each species' anatomy, walls that shifted colors based on the collective mood of the occupants, and a ceiling that displayed real-time star maps of 17 different sectors. Very impressive. Also very unnecessary. But hey, when you're trying to educate beings from 400 different worlds, I guess you go all out. To my left sat Vex, a crystalline being from the Prism Collective who communicated through light patterns and had the charming habit of calculating the probability of failure for everything anyone said. Right now, those calculations were flashing across their translucent surface in what I'd learned to recognize as mild anxiety. Apparently, today's final exam had a historical failure rate of 87.4%. Thanks for that, Vex. Really boosting everyone's confidence. Behind me, Quilp was doing that thing where his slug-like body retracted into his shell whenever someone looked at him. Poor guy. He was from a world where conflict resolution involved hiding underground for a few decades until everyone forgot what they were fighting about. Effective on his planet, maybe. Less useful when you're trying to mediate trade disputes between warring star systems. And then there was Xanthar. Oh, Xanthar. Picture a 7-foot-tall iguana who'd read one too many military strategy manuals and thought that made him the next great galactic general. He was currently polishing his ceremonial scales and muttering about how his people, the mighty Saurian Empire, had conquered 12 systems through superior tactical thinking. Sure they had, big guy. That's why they'd been pacified by the Galactic Council 300 years ago. The door at the front of the classroom dissolved, literally dissolved, because apparently regular doors were too primitive. And in walked Commander Fleeks. Now, Fleeks was what you'd get if you crossed an octopus with a filing cabinet and gave it a military rank. All tentacles and organized efficiency, with this habit of sorting data crystals while talking that made everyone nervous. "Attention, final year candidates," Fleeks announced, his voice carrying that universal tone of authority that transcended species barriers. "Today marks your ultimate examination. Not a written test, not a simulation exercise, not a diplomatic role-play scenario." He paused for effect, which was impressive, considering he didn't have traditional facial features to work with. "Today you face the reality chamber." The entire class went silent. Even Vex's light patterns dimmed to a worried amber. Quilp's shell sealed completely shut with an audible pop. Xanthar, of course, puffed up his chest. "Finally! A chance to demonstrate true Saurian combat prowess." Commander Fleek's tentacles twitched in what I'd learned was the equivalent of an eye roll. "This is not about combat, Cadet Xanthar. This is about problem-solving under extreme pressure. The reality chamber presents scenarios that have challenged the greatest minds in galactic history. Situations where traditional diplomatic protocols have failed, where brute force is useless, where even the most advanced technology cannot provide a solution." He began distributing data tablets to each of us, his tentacles moving with practiced efficiency. "You will enter alone. You will face a scenario that has been deemed unsolvable by previous test takers. Your responses will be monitored and analyzed. There is no time limit, but understand this. In 300 years of Academy history, only 12% of candidates have achieved a satisfactory resolution." I looked down at my tablet. The screen was blank except for a single line of text. "Prepare for insertion into scenario Omega-7. Great. Even the scenarios had ominous names around here. "Home final note," Commander Fleeks continued, his voice dropping to that register that meant he was about to say something important. "The reality chamber responds to your actual personality, your true instincts, your fundamental approach to problem solving. You cannot fake your way through this examination. It will reveal exactly who you are." He looked directly at me, and I swear his tentacles formed something that might have been a smile. "The examination begins in 5 minutes. Good luck, candidates. You're going to need it." As the other students began their various species-specific anxiety rituals, I just sat back in my chair and cracked my knuckles. 12% success rate? Unsolvable scenarios? This was going to be fun. The reality chamber looked like someone had taken a perfectly normal room and then decided it needed more nightmares. White walls that hummed with energy, a floor that felt solid but seemed to ripple when you weren't looking directly at it, and sensors everywhere. I mean everywhere. The Academy wasn't taking any chances on missing a single moment of our inevitable failures. I was the third to go. Vex had entered first, emerging 20 minutes later with their light patterns flickering in what I'd learned meant existential crisis. They wouldn't say what happened, just kept muttering probability calculations that didn't add up to anything good. Quilp had lasted exactly 4 minutes before the chamber doors opened, and he came slithering out at maximum speed, leaving a trail of nervous slime behind him. He'd immediately rolled into his shell and hadn't come out since. Now it was my turn. "Cadet Morrison," Commander Fleek's voice crackled through the intercom as I stepped inside. "You are about to enter Scenario Omega-7. This simulation has been attempted by over 3,000 candidates in the past 50 years. The success rate is 0%. Well, that was encouraging. Previous attempts have included trained military strategists, master diplomats, and beings with psychic abilities that can influence hostile creatures. All have failed. The scenario parameters are as follows." The chamber walls flickered, and suddenly I was standing in what looked like a colonial settlement. Small buildings, agricultural equipment scattered around, the kind of place where people came to start over and build something new. Except everything was wrong. Scorch marks on the buildings, farming equipment twisted into unrecognizable metal sculptures, and a silence that made your skin crawl. "Colony designation New Eden," the commander's voice continued. "Population approximately 2,000 civilians. 3 days ago, a creature emerged from the unexplored regions of this world. Initial reports classified it as a Class X apex predator. Length, approximately 40 meters. Mass estimated at over 200 tons. Intelligence level, unknown but higher than previously catalogued predators." A holographic display materialized in front of me, showing grainy footage of something that looked like evolution had gotten drunk and decided to combine a T-Rex with a scorpion and throw in some tentacles for good measure. It moved with a fluid grace that something that big had no right to possess. "The creature has not attacked the colonists directly," Fleeks continued. "However, it has systematically destroyed their infrastructure, power plants, communication arrays, water treatment facilities, transportation hubs. It appears to be methodically dismantling their ability to survive on this world." The footage showed the beast tearing apart a fusion generator with surgical precision, avoiding the residential areas but making sure every piece of vital technology was reduced to scrap. Traditional approaches have been simulated extensively. Military intervention results in total casualties with no damage to the target. Diplomatic contact protocols have yielded no response. Evacuation is impossible as the creature has destroyed all spacecraft and communication systems. The colonists have approximately 48 hours before their emergency supplies are exhausted. The hologram shifted, showing me a real-time map of the colony. 2,000 red dots representing civilians, huddled in the center of the settlement, and one massive blue dot, currently demolishing what looked like their last functioning solar array about 2 kilometers away. "Your task," Commander Fleeks announced with what I swear was satisfaction in his voice, "is to resolve this situation with minimal loss of life. The parameters of success are as follows: preserve the colony, neutralize the threat, and demonstrate application of advanced diplomatic principles." The recording ended, and I was alone with my thoughts and a really big problem. I stood there for exactly 30 seconds, taking in the scenario. Then I did something that apparently no one had done in 50 years of attempts. I raised my hand. "Commander," I called out, "I've got a question about the mission parameters." There was a long pause, like really long. I was starting to think the intercom was broken when Fleek's voice came back, sounding confused. "This is highly irregular, Cadet Morrison. The simulation has already begun. What is your question?" I looked at the holographic display again, watching the creature methodically tear apart a communications relay, with what looked suspiciously like problem-solving behavior rather than mindless destruction. "Yeah, so, about this neutralize the threat part," I said, keeping my voice conversational. "Do you want it alive?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, from what sounded like the observation deck, I heard Quilp's muffled voice from inside his shell. "Did the human just ask if they want the unstoppable death monster alive?" Vex's light patterns were flashing so rapidly they were probably visible from orbit. "Probability of voluntary creature capture by single individual, 0.0001%. Margin of error, negligible. Xanthar's voice boomed across the chamber. Madness! The mighty Saurian Empire would never attempt such foolishness. We would call for orbital bombardment and be done with it. Commander Fleek's tentacles were probably having some kind of seizure in the observation room, but his voice maintained that professional calm. Cadet Morrison, the creature is classified as an extreme threat. Previous simulations have established that it cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or deterred. Survival of the colonists requires elimination of the hostile entity. I nodded, still studying the tactical display. The creature was moving with purpose, following what looked like a very specific plan. Infrastructure first, then secondary systems, working its way methodically through everything that made the colony viable. That wasn't the behavior of a mindless predator. That was the behavior of something that understood exactly what it was doing. Right, I get that, I said. But you didn't answer my question. The mission says neutralize the threat. In my experience, there's usually more than one way to neutralize something. So, I'm asking again, do you want it alive? Another pause. This time I could hear whispered conversations in about 6 different languages coming from the observation deck. Finally, Commander Fleeks responded. Cadet Morrison, if you believe you can resolve this scenario through non-lethal means, you are free to attempt such an approach. However, I must stress that no previous candidate has survived direct contact with the entity. I grinned. Now that was more like it. Copy that, Commander. Jake Morrison, going hunting. I could practically hear the collective brain aneurysm happening in the observation deck. Through the intercom, Vex's light patterns were strobing so fast they sounded like a broken fluorescent bulb. Probability recalculation in progress, Vex announced, their voice carrying that crystalline resonance that meant they were really stressed. Human claims intention to hunt apex predator. Historical precedent for successful human predation of Class X entities. 0. Revised probability of mission success, 0.00001%. Error margin, still negligible, but now includes factor for human unpredictability. He's lost his mind, Quilp's muffled voice came from inside his shell. Completely, utterly, irreversibly insane. The creature is 40 meters long, it weighs 200 tons, it's been systematically dismantling advanced technology with surgical precision. Xanthar's booming voice cut through the chatter. Preposterous! Even the mighty Saurian Empire would require a full battle fleet to engage such a creature. This human shows no understanding of proper military protocol. I was still studying the tactical display, watching the creature's movement patterns. It had just finished with the solar array and was now heading toward what looked like a water purification plant. Methodical, purposeful, and most importantly, it was following a very predictable route. Commander Fleeks, I called out, can you patch me through to the colony's emergency management system? I need to check their environmental data. Lieutenant Morrison, Fleek's voice carried a note of professional concern mixed with morbid curiosity. I feel obligated to point out that you are about to attempt something that has resulted in simulated death for every previous candidate who tried direct engagement. Yeah, I heard you the first time, I said, pulling up a holographic interface that showed the colony's layout in 3 dimensions. But here's the thing. Everyone who came before me was thinking like a galactic citizen. All that advanced training in diplomatic protocols and conflict resolution theory, very civilized, very sophisticated. I rotated the display, looking at the creature's path from different angles. There it was. The pattern was so obvious once you knew what to look for. Problem is, I continued, accessing the colony's geological survey data. Sometimes you don't need sophisticated. Sometimes you just need to remember that every creature in the universe follows the same basic rules: food, water, shelter, and territory. The entity has shown no interest in standard biological imperatives, Vex protested, their light patterns shifting to a frustrated red. It consumes no organic matter, it drinks no water, it constructs no shelter. Exactly, I said, grinning as the environmental data confirmed what I'd suspected. Which means it's not acting on instinct, it's acting on intelligence. And intelligent creatures, no matter how big or scary they are, can be predicted if you understand their goals. I pulled up the geological survey and overlaid it with the creature's movement pattern. Perfect match. See, everyone's been focused on what this thing is doing. Destroying infrastructure, dismantling technology, making the colony uninhabitable. But nobody's been asking why it's doing it in this specific order. The tactical display highlighted the creature's path in chronological order. Power generation first, then communications, then transportation, now water treatment. Each target was connected by a very specific geographical feature. Underground river system, I announced. Runs right under every target this creature has hit. It's not randomly destroying infrastructure. It's following the water table. There was a long pause from the observation deck. To what? Xanthar finally demanded. It follows underground water. This changes nothing. The creature remains a mortal threat. Does it, though? I asked, pulling up the colony's original planetary survey. See, this is where human perspective comes in handy. You all learn to think about conflict in terms of politics and diplomacy and complex social structures. Me? I grew up watching nature documentaries and learning about persistence hunting. I highlighted a section of the geological data that showed a massive cavern system about 15 kilometers from the colony. This creature isn't attacking the colony, I said. It's trying to get home. The silence from the observation deck was so complete I could have heard a pin drop on a moon of Jupiter. Elaborate, Commander Fleeks said finally. Look at the geological data. That cavern system connects to the underground river that runs under the colony. My guess? Our friend here got separated from its territory, maybe by a cave-in or seismic activity, and it's been trying to find its way back ever since. I traced the creature's path on the display. It's following the water, because that's how it navigates. But the colony's infrastructure is interfering with its ability to sense the underground flow. All that electromagnetic interference from power plants and communications arrays. So it's methodically removing each source of interference, trying to find its way home. That's... Quilp's voice came from his shell, sounding stunned. That's actually logical. Of course it's logical, I said. Apex predators don't waste energy on random destruction. Every action has a purpose. The problem is, everyone who came before me was trying to fight it or negotiate with it, but you can't negotiate with someone who doesn't understand you're trying to communicate. I started walking toward the edge of the colony, in the direction of the creature's current position. So what exactly do you propose to do? Vex asked. Their light patterns cycling through what I'd learned was deep confusion. Simple, I said, checking the equipment available at the colony. Farming tools, construction materials, some basic industrial machinery. Not much, but enough for what I had in mind. I'm going to help it get home? By doing what exactly? Commander Fleeks's voice carried a note of fascination despite his obvious concern. I picked up a length of industrial cable and some electromagnetic field generators the colonists had been using for their agricultural systems. By doing what humans do best, I said, shouldering my improvised gear. I'm going to catch something that's bigger and stronger than me using nothing but persistence, pattern recognition, and the fine art of making really good traps. Xanthar's voice cracked slightly. You're going to trap a Class X apex predator with farming equipment. Well, I said, starting to walk toward the sound of crumbling concrete in the distance. When you put it like that, it does sound a little crazy. But here's the thing about humans that you might not have learned in your diplomatic studies. The creature's roar echoed across the colony as it finished demolishing the water treatment plant. Right on schedule. We're the species that figured out how to hunt mammoths with pointy sticks and attitude. A 40-meter lizard with abandonment issues? That's just Tuesday for us. The first thing you need to understand about hunting something that could step on a city bus and not notice is that you don't actually hunt it. You convince it to hunt itself. And the key to that? Understanding that every creature, no matter how big or terrifying, follows predictable patterns when it's stressed. I'd been tracking the beast for about 20 minutes, staying well back and using the colony's remaining sensor network to monitor its movements. The good news was that it was exactly as predictable as I'd hoped. The bad news was that it had just finished with the water treatment facility and was now heading straight for the residential area. Not to attack the colonists, mind you. According to my geological overlay, there was a major confluence of underground streams right under the main housing complex. Poor thing was probably getting desperate, following every possible water signature in the hopes of finding its way home. Cadet Morrison, Commander Fleet's voice crackled through my comm unit. The entity is now within 500 meters of civilian populations. Perhaps it's time to reconsider your approach. Actually, this is perfect, I said, checking the improvised trap components I'd been assembling as I tracked the creature. It's moving exactly where I need it to go. From the observation deck, Quilp's voice reached a pitch that probably violated several noise ordinances. Perfect? The death monster is approaching 2,000 innocent civilians and the human thinks this is perfect? I was crouched behind what used to be a communications relay, watching the creature move through my improvised scope made from colony surveying equipment. Up close, it was even more impressive than the hollows had suggested. 40 meters of scaled muscle moving with the fluid grace of something that had never encountered a predator in its entire evolutionary history. But here's the thing that everyone else had missed. It wasn't moving like a hunter, it was moving like something lost and increasingly frustrated. Vex, I called out, I need you to run a calculation for me. Specify parameters. Vex's voice came back, their light patterns probably visible from orbit at this point. Average persistence hunting success rate for early human populations, factoring in prey-to-predator size differential and environmental advantages. There was a pause. That is a highly irregular request. Early human hunting data is not relevant to current scenario parameters. Humor me. Another pause, then the crystalline sound of Vex processing data at maximum speed. Historical human persistence hunting success rate against megafauna, approximately 67%. However, largest recorded prey maximum body mass, approximately 6 tons. Current target mass, 200 tons. Scaling probability of success, 0.03%. See, that's where you're wrong, I said, carefully positioning the first component of my trap. You're calculating this like I'm trying to kill it, but I'm not hunting it to eat it. I'm hunting it to help it. The creature had stopped about 300 meters from the residential area and was doing something that looked suspiciously like sniffing the air, except instead of a nose, it was using some kind of bioelectrical sensing organ that made the scales along its skull light up in complex patterns. It's trying to echolocate the water flow, I realized. The electromagnetic interference from the colony's power grid is like trying to hear a whisper in a thunderstorm. I activated the first part of my trap, a series of electromagnetic field dampeners I jury-rigged from the colony's agricultural equipment. The fields created a corridor of relative silence, electromagnetically speaking, leading away from the residential area and toward the industrial sector, where I'd been setting up my real surprise. The creature's head snapped up immediately. Its bioelectrical organs flared brighter, and for the first time since this whole scenario started, it looked genuinely hopeful. It's working, I whispered into the comm. It's following the clear path. Following the path to what, exactly? Commander Fleeks asked. To the most elaborate persistence hunt in human history. I moved to the second position, activating another set of dampeners. The creature followed, moving faster now, its massive form actually graceful as it navigated around the colony's outer buildings. From the observation deck, I could hear Xanthar making choking sounds. The human is leading it like a domestic animal. This is impossible. Creatures of this magnitude cannot be simply guided. Sure they can, I said, activating the third dampener and watching the creature adjust its path exactly as predicted. You just have to understand what they want and make it easier for them to get it than to fight you. But here's where the real human ingenuity came in. See, everyone was focused on the creature's size and power. What they weren't thinking about was basic physics, and the one advantage that every human hunter has relied on for millennia: endurance. I'd been running for almost an hour now, staying ahead of the creature, activating dampeners in sequence, creating a clear, electromagnetic path that led exactly where I wanted it to go. And I wasn't even breathing hard yet. The creature, on the other hand, was starting to show signs of fatigue. All that mass takes energy to move, especially when you're trying to navigate carefully around structures instead of just smashing through them. Cadet Morrison, Vex's voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. I am detecting elevated stress hormones in the entity's biosignature. It appears to be experiencing what humans would term anxiety. Exactly, I said, reaching the final position. It's been lost for who knows how long. It's in an unfamiliar environment, and it's getting tired. Classic persistence hunting dynamics. The industrial sector opened up into a large open area that the colonists had been using for heavy equipment storage. Perfect for what I needed. I'd spent the better part of an hour turning it into what my ancestors would have recognized as a classic persistence hunting ground. A place where the prey's advantages become Now comes the tricky part, I said, taking position behind a massive piece of construction equipment. The creature emerged into the clearing, following my electromagnetic breadcrumbs, and immediately realized something was wrong. It was boxed in on 3 sides by industrial buildings, with only one obvious exit, and blocking that exit was a series of obstacles that I'd carefully constructed from colony equipment. Not barriers, mind you. That would have just made it angry. Instead, I'd created what looked like a clear path home, but one that required the creature to move through a very specific route, at a very specific pace. Persistence hunting isn't about outrunning your prey, I explained to my captive audience. It's about outlasting them, making them work harder than they want to, keeping them stressed and confused until they make the choice you want them to make. The creature approached my obstacles cautiously, I'd made them just high enough that it would have to duck to get through, just narrow enough that it would have to move carefully, just complex enough that it would have to think about each step instead of just charging forward. And at the end of the obstacle course, I'd placed the strongest electromagnetic dampener I could build, creating a zone of complete electromagnetic silence directly over what appeared to be a large maintenance pit. Which was actually a large maintenance pit, just one that I'd lined with industrial netting and fitted with a remotely operated cover system. "You're going to trap it in a hole?" Quilp's voice squeaked from his shell. "Not trap," I corrected. "Catch. There's a difference." The creature was halfway through the obstacle course now, moving slowly and carefully. Its bioelectrical sensors were going crazy as they detected the clear signal ahead. It could sense the underground water system through the electromagnetically quiet zone, and it was so close now that it was willing to endure the inconvenience of my obstacle course to get there. "Persistence hunting is about patience," I said, watching the creature navigate the final approach. "You don't force the prey to do what you want. You make what you want the most attractive option available." The creature reached the edge of the pit and paused, its sensors flaring as they detected the clear water signal directly below. It could probably sense the underground river system better than it had since before the colony was built. Well, it took one careful step forward, testing the camouflaged covering. "And the beautiful thing about helping someone get what they want," I said, finger hovering over the remote control, "is that they'll walk right into your trap with a smile on their face." The creature committed its full weight to the apparently solid ground over the pit. I triggered the release. 200 tons of confused apex predator dropped 15 feet into a pit lined with industrial netting strong enough to hold a shuttle. The pit itself was positioned directly over the main underground river channel, so the creature could sense its way home clearly for the first time in weeks. And because the pit was designed for maintenance access to the colony's water systems, it already had a tunnel leading directly to the cavern system where the creature belonged. "Target secured," I announced. "One Class X apex predator, captured alive and unharmed with a clear path home provided as a bonus." The creature's roars from the pit weren't angry, they were relieved. From the observation deck, the silence stretched so long I was starting to wonder if everyone had fainted. Finally, Commander Fleek's voice came through the comm, sounding like he was questioning everything he'd ever learned about conflict resolution. "G'day, Morrison. Did you just solve an impossible scenario by convincing the threat to capture itself?" I looked down into the pit, where the creature was already investigating the tunnel entrance with obvious excitement. "Pretty much, yeah. Though technically I prefer to think of it as the galaxy's first interspecies relocation service." The creature's roars from the pit had shifted from relief to what I was starting to recognize as excitement. Through the industrial netting, I could see it exploring the tunnel entrance with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for finding your car keys after thinking they were lost forever. "Cadet Morrison," Commander Fleek's voice came through the comm with the careful tone of someone trying to process something that shouldn't be possible. "Please provide a detailed status report." I climbed down into the pit using the maintenance ladder, keeping well clear of the creature but close enough to observe its behavior. Up close, it was even more magnificent than the hollows had suggested. The scales shifted color in complex patterns that I was starting to realize might actually be a form of communication. "Status report is as follows," I said, watching the creature's bioelectrical organs pulse in what looked like contentment. "One Class X apex predator, designation unknown, successfully contained using non-lethal methods. 0 casualties. Colony infrastructure damage limited to pre-existing destruction. Creature appears to be in good health and is showing clear signs of recognizing its home territory through the tunnel system." The beast had managed to get about half its massive head into the tunnel opening and was making sounds that were definitely not roars anymore. More like the galaxy's largest purr. "Furthermore," I continued, pulling out a portable scanner I'd borrowed from the colony's geological survey equipment, "preliminary bioscans suggest this isn't actually a predator at all." That got everyone's attention. Even Quilp's shell cracked open slightly. "Explain," Commander Fleek said. I held up the scanner, showing readings that were pretty definitively not what you'd expect from an apex carnivore. "Dental structure's wrong for a predator. These aren't teeth for tearing meat. They're designed for crushing and grinding. Digestive system analysis suggests a diet primarily consisting of mineral-rich rock formations and crystalline structures." The creature had extracted its head from the tunnel and was now looking at me with what I could swear was curiosity rather than hostility. Its bioelectrical organs were pulsing in slow, rhythmic patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. "It's not a predator," I announced. "It's a geophage, a rock eater. Probably feeds on the mineral deposits in the underground cavern systems." From the observation deck, Vex's light patterns went absolutely haywire, recalculating all previous threat assessments. If the entity is herbivorous equivalent, then previous behavioral analysis was fundamentally flawed. More than flawed, I said, approaching the creatures slowly. Everyone assumed it was destroying the colony's infrastructure out of hostility, but look at what it actually targeted. I pulled up the tactical display on my portable unit, highlighting the pattern of destruction. Power generators, communication arrays, water treatment facilities. Every single target contained high concentrations of rare earth metals and crystalline components. The creature had noticed my approach and lowered its massive head to my level. This close, I could see that its eyes weren't the cold, predatory stare everyone had described. They were intelligent, curious, and what I could only describe as hopeful. It wasn't trying to make the colony uninhabitable, I said, reaching out slowly to touch the creature's snout. It was harvesting the minerals it needed to survive. The moment my hand made contact with its scales, the creature's bioelectrical organs flared in complex patterns that were definitely some form of communication. The portable scanner in my other hand went crazy, picking up electromagnetic signatures that looked suspiciously like structured data. Holy shit, I breathed, looking at the scanner readings. It's trying to talk to me. Language, Cadet Morrison, Commander Fleek said automatically, but his voice carried more fascination than disapproval. Sorry, Commander, but this is kind of a big deal. The creature is demonstrating clear signs of sapient intelligence. These electromagnetic patterns aren't random. They're structured, repetitive, and responsive to external stimuli. I held the scanner closer to the creature's bioelectrical organs, and the patterns immediately shifted, becoming more complex and urgent. I think it's trying to explain something, I said. Vex, are you getting this data feed? Affirmative. Vex's voice carried more excitement than I'd ever heard from them. Preliminary analysis suggests a sophisticated electromagnetic communication system. Pattern complexity indicates intelligence level comparable to most spacefaring species. The creature's patterns shifted again, and this time the scanner picked up what looked like geographical coordinates, overlaid with what could only be described as emotional context. It's not just intelligent, I realized. It's scared, lost, and it's been trying to tell someone where it belongs this whole time. I looked up at the creature's massive face, those intelligent eyes watching me with what I now understood was desperate hope. You got separated from your family, didn't you? I asked softly. Cave-in, maybe? Seismic activity? And you've been following the underground rivers trying to find your way back home. The creature's response was immediate and unmistakable. The bioelectrical patterns shifted to what even I could recognize as confirmation and relief. It pressed its snout gently against my hand, and the scanner registered patterns that were definitely the electromagnetic equivalent of gratitude. But you couldn't navigate properly because of all the electromagnetic interference from the colony, I continued. So you did what any intelligent creature would do. You removed the sources of interference, not realizing that those were keeping other intelligent creatures alive. More confirmation patterns, tinged with what the scanner was interpreting as regret and concern. Don't worry about it, I said, patting the creature's snout. Misunderstandings happen. The important thing is that we can fix this. I turned back toward the observation deck, where I imagined several alien minds were being thoroughly blown. Commander Fleeks, I'm recommending immediate revision of this creature's threat classification from Class X, Apex Predator, to Class A, Protected Sapient Species. It's not a monster, it's just someone who got lost and made some unfortunate choices while trying to get home. The creature's purring sound returned, even louder now, and it began moving toward the tunnel entrance with obvious eagerness. The tunnel was just barely large enough for it to fit through, but it was clearly willing to squeeze. Furthermore, I said, watching the creature begin its journey home, I'm recommending that the Academy revise its approach to impossible scenarios. Sometimes the solution isn't about defeating the threat or negotiating with it. Sometimes it's about understanding that there was never a threat in the first place. The creature paused at the tunnel entrance and looked back at me one more time. Its bioelectrical patterns shifted to something the scanner translated as farewell and thanks, and then it disappeared into the darkness, heading home at last. From the observation deck, I could hear the sound of Quilp's shell opening completely for the first time all day. The human, Quilp's voice was filled with wonder. The human made friends with the unstoppable death monster. Not friends, exactly, I said, climbing back out of the pit. More like I gave someone directions when they were lost. Xanthar's voice boomed across the chamber, but for once it didn't sound boastful. It sounded awed. In all the military histories of the Saurian Empire, there is no record of victory achieved through compassion for the enemy. That's because it wasn't the enemy, I said. It was just someone who needed help getting home. The simulation chamber began to fade around me as the reality chamber powered down, but not before I caught one last glimpse of the tactical display, showing the creature's biosignature moving rapidly through the tunnel system toward the main cavern complex. Moving toward its family. Scenario complete, I announced. Colony saved, threat neutralized, and one very large geological engineer successfully reunited with its natural habitat. Commander Fleck's voice came through the intercom one final time, sounding like he was questioning 3 centuries of academy training. Cadet Morrison, in 50 years of administering this examination, I have never seen anyone solve Scenario Omega-7 by adopting the threat as a pet. I didn't adopt it, I protested as the chamber doors opened. I just gave it a ride home. There's a difference? I grinned, stepping out of the reality chamber to face my stunned classmates and probably several very confused instructors. Yeah, pets you have to feed. That thing probably eats its weight in rare earth metals every day. Way too expensive to keep. The observation deck looked like the aftermath of a philosophical bomb explosion. Commander Fleek's tentacles were twitching in what I'd learned was his species' equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Vex was cycling through light patterns so rapidly they were probably visible from 3 star systems away. Quilp had emerged completely from his shell and was staring at me like I'd just performed actual magic, and Xanther was sitting in stunned silence, which might have been the most disturbing development of all. But it was the other figures in the observation room that really caught my attention. About a dozen academy instructors and administrators had apparently shown up to watch the human either succeed spectacularly or fail in equally spectacular fashion. Based on their expressions, they weren't quite sure which one they'd witnessed. Dean Kelvarix, the Academy's head of conflict resolution studies, was a tall, ethereal being who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a philosophy professor. Their multifaceted eyes were fixed on me with the kind of intensity usually reserved for studying particularly confusing artifacts. "Cadam Morrison," Dean Kelvarix said in a musical voice. "In 300 years of Academy history, Scenario Omega-7 has been attempted by over 3,000 candidates. Military specialists, diplomatic corps veterans, beings with psychic abilities that can influence hostile minds. The scenario was designed to be unsolvable using conventional methods." I nodded, still brushing dust from the maintenance pit off my uniform. "That's what Commander Fleeks mentioned. 0% success rate, right?" Indeed. The scenario was crafted specifically to demonstrate the limitations of traditional peacekeeping approaches when faced with truly impossible situations. It was meant to teach humility in the face of cosmic-scale problems. Dean Kelvarix moved closer, their compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights in patterns that probably had some kind of meaning in their culture. "Instead, you have forced us to confront a rather uncomfortable possibility," they continued, "that perhaps our definition of impossible was simply limited by our own perspectives." Professor Thimal, the Academy's expert in xenopsychology, stepped forward. They looked like a cross between an octopus and a tree, with bark-like skin and branches that moved independently. "The creature's electromagnetic communication patterns are unlike anything in our databases. The complexity suggests not just intelligence, but a sophisticated understanding of emotional context and social dynamics. More than that," added Dr. Qualani, whose species apparently evolved from something that looked like a very scholarly jellyfish, "the creature demonstrated restraint. It carefully avoided the residential areas despite their proximity to its targets. It showed consideration for other intelligent life, even while experiencing what must have been significant distress." I looked around at the assembled faculty, all of whom were staring at me like I'd just rewritten the laws of physics. "With respect, professors," I said, "this really isn't that complicated. The creature was scared, lost, and hungry. It did what any intelligent being would do. It tried to solve its problems with the resources available. The fact that those resources happened to be the colony's infrastructure was just bad luck." Vex's light patterns shifted to something I recognized as their version of academic excitement. "But the implications are staggering. If we have misclassified one species so fundamentally, how many other threats are actually just misunderstood entities requiring assistance rather than elimination?" "Exactly." Dean Kelvarix's voice carried a note of revelation that was slightly alarming. "Our entire approach to conflict resolution has been predicated on the assumption that unknown variables represent potential hostility. But what if unknown simply means unknown?" Commander Fleeks finally found his voice. "The Academy's core curriculum has remained unchanged for over 2 centuries. We teach diplomatic protocol, threat assessment, and conflict de-escalation based on established galactic norms. And it works great, I said, if everyone you're dealing with shares those same galactic norms. But what about species that haven't been contacted yet? Beings that communicate in ways we don't recognize? Creatures whose behavior patterns don't match our databases? Professor Thimel's branches rustled, and what I'd learned was their species' version of excitement. You approached the scenario from a completely different paradigm. Instead of trying to resolve a conflict, you identified and addressed an underlying need. I just asked myself what I would want if I was lost and scared and couldn't get anyone to understand me, I said. The answer was pretty obvious. I'd want someone to help me get home. Dr. Kwalani's translucent form pulsed thoughtfully. The human demonstrates what we might term empathetic pragmatism, the ability to recognize emotional context in seemingly hostile behavior while maintaining practical focus on solution-oriented outcomes. That sounded way more impressive than what I'd actually done, but I wasn't about to correct them. Calvarix began pacing, which was an interesting sight given that their legs bent in directions that made geometry uncomfortable. The question becomes, how do we integrate this approach into our existing curriculum? More importantly, Commander Fleeks added, his tentacles finally settling into more organized patterns. How do we prepare future peacekeepers for scenarios where the traditional frameworks simply don't apply? They all looked at me expectantly, like I had some kind of master plan for revolutionizing galactic education, which was flattering but also slightly terrifying. Well, I said slowly, you could start by teaching students to ask different questions. Instead of how do we defeat this threat or how do we negotiate with this entity, maybe try, what does this being actually want? And how can we help them get it in a way that doesn't hurt anyone else? Quilp, who had been listening with the fascination of someone watching their entire worldview get rebuilt from the ground up, suddenly spoke up. But how do you learn to think like that? My people have been using established protocols for conflict avoidance for millennia. Practice, I said. Start small. Next time someone's behaving in a way that seems irrational or hostile, spend 5 minutes trying to figure out what they might be afraid of or what they might need. You'd be surprised how often aggression is just fear wearing a disguise. Xanthar, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally found his voice. The Saurian Empire's military academies teach that unknown entities should be treated as hostile until proven otherwise. It is a fundamental principle of survival. And how's that been working out for you? I asked gently. Xanthar's scales flushed a color I hadn't seen before. We have been at peace for 300 years under Galactic Council oversight. Right, so maybe it's time to try a different approach. Dean Calvarek stopped pacing and fixed me with that intense, multifaceted stare again. Cadet Morrison, the Academy has a proposal for you. I had a feeling I wasn't going to like where this was going. Instead of graduating into the standard diplomatic corps assignment, would you consider remaining at the Academy as an instructor? And there it was. I looked around the room at all those expectant alien faces, each representing thousands of years of established tradition and protocol. What would I be teaching? I asked. Applied human problem solving, Professor Tamel said immediately. A new course focused on alternative approaches to conflict resolution. Practical empathy in hostile scenarios, Dr. Kwalani added. Basic threat recontextualization, Vex contributed, their light patterns bright with enthusiasm. Or, Dean Calvarex said with what might have been a smile, we could simply call it how to ask better questions. I looked around the room one more time. Quilp was practically vibrating with excitement at the thought of learning new approaches to problem solving. Xanthar looked like he was wrestling with concepts that challenged everything he'd been taught, but was genuinely curious about the outcome. Vex was already calculating probability matrices for curriculum development, and even Commander Fleek's tentacles had arranged themselves in patterns that suggested approval. There's just one condition, I said. Name it, Dean Calvarek said immediately. My first lecture is going to be called Sometimes the Monster Just Wants to Go Home. And I'm going to start by showing the class footage of a scared, intelligent being who got labeled as an unstoppable threat because no one bothered to ask what it actually needed. The silence stretched for a moment. Then Professor Tamal's branches began rustling with what I was learning to recognize as academic delight. I believe, they said, that this is going to be the most popular course in Academy history. 6 months later, I was standing in front of the largest lecture hall the Academy had ever constructed, looking out at an audience that included not just students, but active diplomats, military strategists, and xenopsychologists from across the galaxy. Good morning, class, I said, activating the holographic display that showed a 40-meter creature systematically dismantling a colony's infrastructure. Today we're going to talk about the day I met my first alien, and how asking one simple question changed everything we thought we knew about impossible problems. In the front row, Quilp raised his hand eagerly. Behind him, Vex's light patterns pulsed with anticipation, and in the back, Xanthar sat with a datapad, ready to take notes on what he now called advanced strategic compassion. The question, I said, as the hologram showed the creature's first appearance, was this: do you want it alive? And for the first time in Academy history, everyone in the room already knew the answer. Yes. Always yes. Because sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to realize it was never really a problem in the first place.